Morning, thank you for attending here. What I want to go through this morning is just a general overview of what biopesticides are so that we understand the technologies that we're working with. And I'm very happy that if you've got any questions as I go along, just stick up your hand and ask me questions, but I'll also stop at the end to ask additional questions. Let me just move that before I fall over it. Okay, so thinking about where we are in Europe at the moment and the regulation that's gone on. Europe developed the new plant protection regulation and sustainable use directive. And in this sustainable use directive, they say that you've got to practice crop protection with integrated pest management. And this became law a year ago. So what the Europe means by that is that you first think about your agroecosystem, you think about monitoring, and you think about the varieties that you're using. Then you come in with natural enemies. Then you come in with biopesticides, and I'll start to explain what I mean by biopesticides. Then finally, you start to think about how you use synthetic chemical pesticides. And so Europe's driving very strongly towards this approach to integrated pest management. What that means is there's a lot of interest in biopesticides, and we can see globally that the biopesticide market is increasing around about 15%. When this was first forecast, it was considered to be a very optimistic forecast, and that isn't really what's going to happen, but it is exactly what is happening, and possibly even at a faster rate than this. So around the world, there's a lot of biopesticide technologies coming forward. There's a lot happening. And if we look within Europe at the number of products available, I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago, HDC commissioned me to do a review of biopesticides, and these reports are available. And at that time, there were around about 70 active substances on the EU, listed in the EU. We're now here, sort of at the end of last year, at 121 active substances. So the number of technologies that are available is increasing, and increasing very rapidly. As you can see, a majority are insecticides, fungicides as well, but the fungicides are actually increasing probably faster than insecticides as well. So a lot of technologies coming forward. But what are biocontrol agents or biopesticides? What am I referring to? There's 4 groups. There's no global definition. It's not really clear. But roughly, most people think of them as 4 groups. And this grouping I'm referring to comes from the International Biocontrol Manufacturers Association, and they divide biopesticides or biocontrol agents as follows. So the first group of macroorganisms, and I'm not going to talk about these today really, but some people will consider nematodes to be a biopesticide. And these are the products that you have available in the UK. There's details of this in my presentation that you've got copies of, but also in the HDC fact sheet, biopesticide fact sheet, you've got lists of what's available. I just want to make the point that this product at bottom, Trianum, it used to be an exempted product. It is now a registered product. So this actually should move off this list onto the registered list. It was registered a few weeks ago. I left it here just because many of you will be familiar with it as something that's exempted from registration, but you'll see it now has a MAP number on it. Okay. So these types of products should be familiar to you. Then going on to thinking of the second group, semiochemicals, pheromones. What are these? You're probably most familiar with semiochemicals and pheromones as substances used in traps for monitoring insect pests. Or, for example, the delta traps in olive trees is a well-known example. When they are used for monitoring, they don't require registration. So you'll see there's a lot of traps available for monitoring insects, and far less available for use as in plant protection. And essentially what a pheromone semiochemical, it's a substance that is produced by one organism of a species to affect another organism of the same species. And the most commonly ones are SCLPs, really easy to say, straight chain lepidopteran pheromones. Essentially these work against moths and butterflies. What happens here is you have a trap like this. with the pheromone inside it, usually in a small plastic vial or something like that, and there's a slow release of the pheromone out from this plastic vial. And they're used principally for mating disruption. And a good example is in apple orchards. We've got products where the apple orchard, they put in so much female pheromone that the males can't find the individual females and they can't mate. They get up exhausted trying, so you don't get a second generation. Basically, there's no sex with that system. And there's some really nice formulations coming forward. I've just taken 2 examples that are used in Southern Europe. And this one you can see here, this is impregnated with the pheromone. It's wrapped around the stem of the rice, and these are dotted across the rice field, secreting female pheromones. And the same idea here, in cotton here, is just put over the plants and does the same thing. But semiochemicals, oh yeah, this is a really nice one. I like this. This is very clever. So a lot of the insects, mating only occurs in the evening. So someone's designed this. It's on a timer. So it only switches on and pushes out pheromone in the evening when the pest is around. So it really is very targeted about how much active substance goes out, when it's out there, and how it's used. So that was describing mating disruption, which is one of the main ways that pheromones are used. But the other ways is lure and kill, where you're attracting the insects into a trap and they're picking up a pesticide, for example, and that's killing them, usually females being attracted here, or also where you're trying to pull in as many insects as possible. And then they're using something that's known as pheromones, which are usually feed. They're copies of feeding stimulants. So the insects are coming in because they think they'll find food, and then they're getting killed as well. The only product we have available in the UK is XXCM, and I think this might not be available. Yeah, Paul's nodding. It's no longer actually commercially available, but you might have seen this about. So at the moment, we don't have any semiochemicals available in the UK. Next group then, botanicals. So all these plants are the source of active substances that are used in what are known as botanicals. So orange oil, garlic, which a lot of you will know, the Efficacy products, spearmint oil, then clove gives you eugenol, thyme oil, tagetes oil, and this is the source of limonene. So what is a botanical? It's a substance derived from a plant, but you haven't intentionally altered the substance in extracting it from the plant. It is still what was in the plant. And what that means is you've got a mixture of substances in there. It isn't just one active compound. It is a whole pile of different compounds. And there could be sugars and chlorophylls as well as the active components that's in there. And just because it comes from a plant doesn't mean it's going to be lower risk or less toxic. So be aware of that. They aren't safer or anything like that. That they have to go through full registration. It's complex because it's a complex mixture of chemicals. But it is an area of new products coming in that's growing very rapidly. So these are the products that we have available in the UK. You should be familiar with some of these, I think, by now, because a lot of them, like the garlic concentrate, have been around a very long time. Okay. Then going on to the last group, microbials, and this might be the group you're most familiar with. So this is some of the names that you might see associated with microorganisms. There's some real tongue twisters in there. But the point I want to make with this is what you should pay attention to is the strain name, because the species names change. A few years ago, a group of taxonomists got together in Australia and thought it'd be a really good idea to sort out the taxonomy. So for instance, pre-stock Gliocladium actually is Clonostachys rosea now. They've changed the name. And some of them I can't say, so I'll avoid saying them. This is a new name as well. Metarism anisoplea is now Metarism brunenum. So what you need to keep a key into is that it's about the strain names that these actives are given, and pay attention to that, because the EU regulates by strain, and different strains will do different things. So if you pick up something and think, oh, this Bacillus subtilis, it's the same as every other Bacillus subtilis, it isn't and it won't be. So you need to pay attention to that. So with the microorganisms, what you have is, so microbial biofungicides, you've got fungi against fungi, or you've got bacteria against fungi, or you've got fungi against fungi as well in the case of, say, AQ10. And some of them have a direct action where they'll trap, they'll go round the organism they're trying to kill, and others, there's a competition effect where what you're seeing in green here is the microorganism is rhizosphere competent and it's growing around the root and is active. Then if you look at the insecticides, you've got some insecticides which the insects will pick up on their cuticle, and then the microorganism goes through the cuticle and grows inside the insect. And what you can see here, this fluffiness, is the insect's completely full of the microorganism and it's growing back out of the insect and forming spores. You've got other microbial insecticides which have to be ingested, so like BT or like baculoviruses. They have to go in, the insect has to actually eat them, and then it damages the gut of the insect. And then the microorganism grows inside the insect. What you can see here is the cuticle of the insect all stretched and saggy because it's full of baculovirus. But what a lot of these ingested microorganisms, what happens with them is feeding stops quite quickly because the insect feels pretty ill, basically. So although the insect may still be there and you can't see that it's dead, it's probably not feeding anymore. Microorganisms are produced in one of two ways, and I mention this because this is why you get slightly different products. So you've got solid state fermentation, which is where you just grow the microorganism on a solid media. So you grow it on a rye grain or another cereal, or for instance metarism on rice. So if you've ever used metarism, you'll see that it's rice that's in there. The other way to grow them is in a liquid fermentation, where you start off with a small amount and you go into a bigger fermenter and then into a larger fermenter. These are the insecticides that are available in the UK. Again, a lot of these should be familiar to you by now. And these are the biofungicides that are available. And this is where I was talking about the strain. This is important, this strain here, this strain name, because not all Bacillus subtilis, or this is also called amyloliquefaciens now, same stuff basically. But this strain is important because one strain is not going to perform the same way as another strain. And again, these should all be quite familiar to you. The other thing about a lot of biopesticides is how they work. They don't have simple modes of action, they have quite complex modes of action. So you've got them having a direct effect on the target and maybe damaging it or killing it. So some of the botanicals, which are terpene-based compounds, they act as degreasers. They damage the membranes and the insects then become leaky and desiccate. But a lot of them also stimulate the plant. So they stimulate the plant defense mechanism, so you've got that going on. Some of them will stimulate plant signaling, so plants will signal to each other. And also, you may also have attributes such as the trichodermas, which stimulate the plant itself, just the plant growth. So you've got all these things going on. So when you're applying and using biopesticides, you need to really know how they're working, where to apply them to get the best effect out of them. There's going to be a talk later on today about application, and what I can say about biopesticides, it's very tempting to think of biopesticides because of the way they're formulated, that you can use and apply them exactly the same as chemicals. But you need to be much more thoughtful than that, and I'll leave the later speaker to talk in detail about that. But you need to be very thoughtful about application and not be tempted to just chuck them in a sprayer and an applicator and use them exactly the same way as you have a chemical pesticide. And biopesticides are used for a range of reasons. And I looked at this in terms of the benefits that there is to grow. So it's not just about killing the target, but it's about the other effects that are saying you get is yield and quality improvements, not just because you've removed the pest or disease, but because the microorganism itself or the botanical can also improve the plant. There can be very good host specificity with some of them. So like the baculovirus, they will only kill the species that they're intended for and nothing else. Very amenable to use in IPM programs, useful in resistance management, residue management, and quite interestingly, I mean, you probably know this already, but using them because if you've got something with no harvest interval or no residues, it means it helps you to manage the workforce. So I know the strawberry growers, when they're using some of the biocontrols, it really helps them managing the picking because the pickers can go straight in after spraying, which is useful. Right, perhaps the nitty-gritty, do they work? So perhaps I can, I'll ask a question out to you. So if you've got a crop protection agent and you're using it, hands up those of you who are happy with 50% efficacy. Okay. How many of you are happy with 70% efficacy? How many want 100% efficacy? Okay, both. How many want 100% efficacy? How many are happy with 100% efficacy? Well, none of you put your hands up, so some of you are not telling the truth in here. Okay. So I asked that to the ornamental growers, and the ornamental growers all stuck their hand up at 100%, which is ridiculous because we know that even the best chemical in the world doesn't give 100%. So it's sort of saying, how well do biopesticides work? You know, when you take a biopesticide, what you're looking at is all the attributes that it gives to you. It's not just the efficacy you get. So these are some of the products that are registered in the UK, and this is the level of efficacy that was claimed in the dossiers. I gathered this information from the manufacturers themselves. I don't know if you know that to use the word control on the label, you have to have 80% or above efficacy. So I don't know if any of you noticed that some of the labels that you've got, for instance, Naturalis, doesn't say the word control on it. It says significantly reduces or suppresses. I can't remember how I wrote it. So the words that are on the label are giving you a clue as to the level of efficacy that you can expect to obtain. So then we'll say, if you're not getting high levels of efficacy, how can you use the products? That's the point. It's about how you use the technology, that you're using a repeated application. So this blue line models, if you have a product that has a 30% effect, and I've assumed a 20% recovery in the population because more, say, thrips or whitefly comes in. And you can see that if you have repeated use, even of something that's working at 30%, you will eventually have reduced your population to a level that's acceptable below the damage threshold. The question then is, what's the economics of doing that? And should all my applications be the same biopesticide, different biopesticide and chemical? And that's when the IPM program comes in. And your ideal is the green line. Is you never let your populations get so high that you're always having interventions to stay below the damage threshold and take that approach to crop protection. What we're also seeing happening with the technologies, there's the market's maturing, we're seeing product quality improving and we're seeing improvements in formulation. And with the way in which you use them, you can see a control agent that may only give you 40 to 70% efficacy on its own, being used in programs and being used in a thoughtful way, you can get big reductions in your pest and disease problems. And feedback I've been getting from growers is what you're really interested in is not how effective a product is, but to know that it will give you the same effect every time. So it's the consistency that's actually the critical point, not the level of efficacy. And also knowing when it doesn't work I think is an important aspect. Is it a certain temperature at which it doesn't work? Is there a certain humidity at which it stops working? And that information is useful. And also some of the formulations coming forward improving environmental robustness. And the key part really is how your biopesticide should be used relative to the target, being thoughtful about when you put it into the system. So these are some of the things I think are good practice to get good efficacy, and some of the things that you need to think about and be good at doing. And I think the difference with biopesticides is you don't have the margins to make mistakes. They will pick up if you're following bad practice because they're not systemic. And if you don't deliver them to where they're needed, you can tell with the biopesticides. So you don't have the margins. You've got to actually be better at using the technology. I'm always asked about registration, how products are coming through. So I put this up here. So in the EU, if you want to register a biopesticide, they are registered through exactly the same system as a chemical pesticide. And this system, once your dossier is prepared, it takes about 2 to 2.5 years to get your active substance registered at EU level, and then about 1.5 years to get your product registered at country level. So Paul's smiling at me because he knows it takes longer than that. So any new technology coming forward takes about this long. So there's always a lag for technologies coming forward. So when I'm saying to you there's a lot happening out there, I know there's a lot of new technologies coming forward, but they've got to get through this system first. But as I say, biopesticides are registered through exactly the same system as chemical pesticides. There's no difference with them. The only difference perhaps is that if they represent a lower risk and lower toxicity, you have to do less work to prepare the dossier because you're not triggering additional testing. To bring a biopesticide to market, you're talking of these sorts of costs. So it's not cheap. And so companies don't go into this lightly. So these are good quality products with a lot of information behind them. Something I did in preparation for a previous workshop was I kept hearing people sort of saying, oh, you know, products don't work, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, well, you know, what's going on out there? So basically, if a product doesn't have a MAP number on it, it's illegal. So we have within the UK, you've got registration exempt. So nematodes are exempt from registration and physical acting agents are usually exempt from registration. Then you have some things that are just completely out of scope. So rhizobiums or mycorrhiza, they're out of scope, or plant strengtheners are also out of scope. That said, a new regulation has been developed for these, so they will start to be regulated very shortly. Then you have the registered substances, which have MAP numbers, and then you have these grey products. A few weeks ago, I did some work, and I thought, why is, you know, exactly what's available in the UK. In half an hour's research on the internet, I found 20 illegal products being advertised and sold. So if you are sold a Bacillus subtilis and it says used as a biostimulant, that is an illegal product. If it's a Bacillus subtilis, it needs to be registered. And I know they're cheaper, but you do not know what the quality of those products is. They haven't had to go through regulation. I know how difficult it is for a microorganism to remove human pathogens from it. And so if you're buying these products, you've got no guarantee that the human pathogens have been removed.